Hello, everyone. Great day here in New York. We have gray skies. We had some rain earlier, which in a way might be appropriate for some of the things that we want to speak about today. I'm here with a good friend of mine, Larry. We're in his wood shop. Larry's like a craftsman, a carpenter, you could put it. Larry, if you don't mind to tell me what the origin of your name is. Larry a Jewish name per se?
No, I have a Hebrew name, but my parents went with the tradition of naming me after somebody with the same first letter as their name. So they picked the name Larry because it began with an L, and they had a girl's name if I were going to be a girl, but it would have started with an L.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll tell you why. Because I was curious. So I looked up the origins of Larry, and which is a derivative of Lawrence, and Lawrence meaning Middle English, or at least that's where it came from, or Old French. And then it goes back even further with a Latin base, Laurentus. And I looked up the meaning of that, and it meant a crown, like a crown of laurel.
Right.
And Larry, I see you wearing a crown. In the Christian faith, obviously, we speak about Jesus wearing a crown, so there's some common ground, there's some similarity there. I thought it was interesting. We have different cultures in this world, and we all try to find, I think, common ground where and when we can. Even in the animal kingdom, you look at cats and dogs, they're different, two different cultures, but they belong to the same kingdom. And there's a reason I bring that up. But Larry, even though we may have two different cultures, here's an example. I like to shop at Home Depot, and I think you like to shop at, where do you shop at?
Well, I shop at Lowe's,
At Lowe's.
But I also do shop at Home Depot.
Oh, you do? But you like shopping at Lowe's. At the end of the day, we buy the same things.
They have a rewards program, so they bought my loyalty, is essentially what Lowe's did.
Well, so then if I was to ask, well, who you identify with, a cat or a dog, what would you say?
A dog.
A dog, okay. But you had a beautiful cat inside.
Yes, that is more of my family's pet. Yes.
We're laughing because we're such good friends, and we have some inside jokes and humor relating to this. But the interesting part is that there's commonality and there's common ground in how we live our lives. Whether we shop here or we like this animal or that animal. And being a Christian, Larry being Jewish, there are differences, but tremendous similarities. For example, when I look at the Bible, I see the Old Testament and I see the New Testament. Larry, when you look at the Bible, what do you see?
I mean, when somebody says the word Bible to me, my thought is the Old Testament, the 5 books, if you will.
The 5 books. It's interesting. I was speaking to a rabbi recently, and I was thinking of the 5 books, and I made reference to the Old Testament. And he basically said to me, we don't really refer to it as the Old Testament. He sees it as the Torah, which are basically Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And I get it. I really do understand that. And then there's the remaining books of the Bible, which are interesting. It's called Tanakh, if I'm saying it properly. The remaining books of the Bible, which are really based on there are Proverbs, there is prophecy, there's poetry, and wisdom. So when you look at the entirety of all the books, even though I see that as the Old Testament, people of other cultures will see it as perhaps 2 sections, such as the Torah and the Tanakh. It's interesting on the term Tanakh. One of the ways I kind of remember that is Tanakh and the door shall open, which is another common ground, because we always think in terms of the New Testament, a knock and the door shall open, which is basically a Christian belief. But I think that's another sign of where there's commonality between the 2 cultures. So, I asked Larry for the opportunity today to speak about a passage in the Old Testament and how it might relate to the New Testament. So, Larry, I decided I wanted to speak about some prophecy. And the prophecy was from the book of Jeremiah. I'm not certain how familiar you are with the book of Jeremiah, but Jeremiah was a prophet. And in particular, I was thinking of chapter 31 and a certain verse, which was verse 15. And in that book, it basically talks about how there was a prophecy and it was fulfilled. And there was weeping and there was loud lament. There was a voice heard in Ramah. Ramah is a little town that was outside of the Jerusalem area. And there was very loud wailing, lamentations. And Rachel, she was considered the matriarch of the population in Judea at the time, and Rachel was crying for the loss of her children. And she refused to be consoled because her children were no more. It's extremely sad, which made me think of this, particularly with the weather that we have outside with gray skies. But more than that, it's, I think, relational to what's happening in this world today. So, to give you some context on the story, it was about 600 years before the birth of Christ, and that's when Jeremiah lived, and the people living in the Judea area was suffering from invasion by groups in the northern areas, which today we know as Iraq and Iran, and they invaded this area. And one of the things they did is they collected all of the people and they put them in an area known as Ramah, and they captured these people and they brought them back to Babylon. It was called the Babylonian exile. But in that process, people were killed, they were slain, they were raped, they were tortured, they were imprisoned. It's horrible, which is why Rachel experienced such great pain, why she was crying. And Rachel, being the matriarch, was crying for the entire nation of Israel at that time. Well, as sad as that is, Jeremiah, in that particular verse, 31 through 15, also spoke of hope and the restoration of Israel. And with that in mind, there is this belief that a new covenant would be formed and Israel would once again be saved. The interesting thing about this particular passage is that it coincides with a passage in the New Testament, Matthew chapter 2, verse 18, where Jesus was born, and King Herod, he felt threatened, hearing that, there's this new king that was born, because he considered himself the king. So what did he do? He sent his henchmen, whoever they were, mercenary soldiers, into Bethlehem to kill all the boys that were age 2 years or younger. It was brutal. It was known as the Massacre of the Innocents, the Massacre of the Infants. It was an atrocity beyond belief. And yet, when Christ was born, there was the hope of redemption. Christ represented hope. He represented restoration. And I think between the prophet Jeremiah and what Christ symbolizes and represents, hope and restoration, there's common ground between our two cultures, philosophically, theologically, and yet there could still be differences between how we think of one particular person, Christ, whether we see him as the Messiah or not the Messiah. What is most important is where the people in the area of Israel can reunite with surrounding territories, which might be maybe impossible, which is why a Messiah is needed. We need somebody who can reunite the groups. The interesting thing, Larry, is when I think about this story, I think about what's happening today. You have these kids who went to a concert in the Gaza Strip, and then you have these terrorist groups who kidnap these kids and terrorized them, brutalized them, committed atrocities. There were pregnant women who were they were killed, and the baby. It's horrible when you really think about what happened and the lamenting that must. It's not. It's more than lamenting. It's something that is very difficult for any of us to understand what the people must be feeling in Israel. The suffering for their lost loved ones. And it makes you wonder why. And then when I think about what I see happening in our communities, protests, it's unfathomable when you really think about how there could be such separation. So there are two things that I think are needed. One is obedience to God to reclaim promised land, and faith, hope in the restoration. And I think if we combine those two aspects, there's union, there's common ground. So, in my mind, the message of Jeremiah, particularly chapter 31, is extremely relevant, not only to what happened 2,600 years ago, but what is happening today. And somehow we all need to find this common ground. Larry, I just gave you a lot of background, some information. Any thoughts on this?
I mean, I only know the story of Jeremiah in very broad strokes. He prophesies the possible destruction of the Jewish people from
That's right.
people from the north. Looking at history, it's, to me, not a great thing to prophesize the destruction of Jews.
No.
It's happened time and time again.
Yeah.
They're a small group compared to the rest of the world. So that being said, I mean, it's all the perspective that you come from. I've always looked at the Bible as allegory. So to me, it has symbolism, it has meaning, it has layered meaning. So yeah, it can be relevant today if you look at it a certain way, and it can be relevant through the times.
Yeah, I see it. At that time, 2,600 years ago, King Nebuchadnezzar II wanted to annihilate the Jewish population, wanted to eliminate them completely. It happened again in World War II with Adolf Hitler. That was the intent. And it's happening again today. So this can't be. I look at the history of this, of what happened. You look at it historically, you look at it culturally, but I think the reality is that we all need to find common ground, and whether it's through the works of the law and the discipline required by the Israeli people to reclaim their ground and to stand their ground. It's not an or, and I think it's an and situation where they need to do that at the same time, maintain the faith that there will be restoration. From the Christian perspective, I believe that comes from Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and we're waiting for the second coming, and yet in the Jewish faith, there is a belief that the Messiah is yet to come. And when that Messiah arrives, that Messiah would unite the people in that area, which, as I said, might be an extreme challenge to do, but we have hope and faith. With that said, thanks for listening, and Larry, thanks so much for being a part of
sharing
this conversation today. It means a lot. You're a good friend. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.